Hi there. Welcome to this Thursday afternoon edition of Needlepoint TV. I'm Ellen Johnson and I'm your host. I'm the owner of Serendipity Needleworks and the founder of the Stitchers Club, and I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. It's Thursday, July the 16th, and I cannot believe that this month is half over. So if you're joining me as a viewer from live, I would love to know where you're watching from. So please type that into the comments box and let's do our quick tech check to make sure that everything is working like it's supposed to. If you can see me and hear me okay, then please either give me a thumbs up or a heart or something to let me know that you can indeed see me. And of course, please share with me where you're watching from, because I do always get a big kick out of seeing who's with me and where you are. If you happen to be watching this as a recording, please also share with me where you're watching the recording from and just say watching the recording, because that's always super fun for me to see too. So, all right, so it looks like you can see me and hear me okay, and I see we have several people popping in, so we'll dive in here in just a second. I want to give everybody a chance to find us. I know sometimes it takes a minute or two for me to show up in your news feed on Facebook. So again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be here with me this afternoon. We're going to chat a little bit about a wonderful thread called Watercolors, and then I also have an announcement that I'd like to share with you at the very end of this broadcast. So, all right, let's see who all we have here. Goodness gracious, people from all over. This is great. So happy to have you all here with me. So I see we have some people where it is raining, and some people are where it is warm. It's hot, not raining here. Beautiful day here. So delighted to see all of you here with us today. So, all right, let's go ahead and just dive right into chatting about watercolors. So, I would love to know in the chat box if you have ever worked with watercolors. Please tell me. Say, yes, I've worked with it, or no, I haven't, because it's always good to know what people's experience is with a particular thread when I'm going to share some tips with you about it. So, Watercolors is made by the Karen Collection. This is a skein of watercolors. This one is called Peach Cobbler. And then this one is another one that is very variegated, and it's called Peach Melba. You can tell by looking at these two. These are just two examples from Lois Karen's thread line, or from the Watercolors line of thread. You can tell by looking at these two that they vary from muted to very, very colorful. So some things that I wanted to share with you, basically just about the thread itself. Let's chat just a few minutes about the properties of the thread. So I mentioned that it's from the Karen Collection. It's the Karen Collection, one of their cotton threads. And I have a skein that I've already wound into a little ball here. This one is called Mint Julep. And this thread is the featured thread this month on over in the Stitchers Club. So we chatted a little bit about this in our section yesterday called Thread Talk. So what I did was I took a skein. We're just going to use this as an example. I took a skein and I untied it at the tag where the tag is attached, and then I opened up the loop, which is, it ends up being about that, well, probably about that long. So I opened up the loop, and then I just wound it into a little ball like this. Now I'm going to share with y'all over on the YouTube channel how I actually do this process. I'm not going to take the time to do it right here now, but there will be a video that will be posted over on our YouTube channel, and I'm going to go ahead and share the link to our YouTube channel here in the chat box so that you can find it easily. That'll be, and there is a place for you if you'd like to subscribe to that. There's a red button that says subscribe, and if you click on that red button, every time I post a new video, you'll get a notification. So it's just another way for us to have a place to host our videos for the free content that we share here through Serendipity Needleworks. So like I said, I'll share with you over in a little video how to get from this to this. And I like to store my watercolors. In fact, I store most of my threads in these floss away bags. These are my all-time favorite way to store and keep my threads organized. So I always take the tag and cut off a piece and attach a piece to it so that I know what color that thread is. So for example, let me give you another example. Let me show you this. So I happen to have on this table this tag and this thread, but not one of these. The only way I know that this goes with this is because I had them put in a little place together. But what I'll do, and I'll just go ahead and do this. I think I'm going to go ahead and do this. Yeah, I have some scissors. So I'll cut off a piece that's about 18 to 20 inches long to give me a good representation of the colors in the repeat, which we'll talk about in just a minute. I'll cut that off, and then I'll take it and double it on itself, and then double it on itself again, and oh, there's the tag. Stick it through the hole, and then loop the tail through the hole, and now I know what evergreen looks like in case it happens to get separated from the ball before I put it in a bag. So that was just a leftover from our retreat that we had, and I was sharing that with people earlier. So anyway, it never did make it down to its home down in my studio. So, but again, like I said, you can see I've done it on this one. I've attached a piece of thread, and then here's my little ball, and I put it into one of these floss away bags, and I keep my threads sorted by color family. So I use the color wheel as my guide, and if I have a multicolored thread, I choose the color that jumps out to me as being the most dominant when I choose which bucket it's going to go into. So for example, looking at this one, this particular thread reads pink to me. So I have a bucket of pink, and so this one would live in my pink bucket. I also have one for, and it's actually blue-red. This would be a blue-red because this pink it has more blue in it than it does than peachy color. So anyway, that's a whole another conversation for another time. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, I do store my threads by color family, and I use the color wheel as the guide. So I have red, orange, yellow, orange, and so on, all the way around the color wheel. So talking about this thread specifically, though, let's get back to the details on this one. This is, like I said, it's 100% cotton. It's Pima cotton, which is a very long staple cotton. It's very strong, and it's also extremely soft. You may have seen shirts, men's shirts made from Pima cotton, and they're just so yummy to wear. Well, this thread is equally yummy to work with because it is so soft. It's also mercerized. It goes through a mercerization process that actually strengthens the fiber. It makes it more receptive to the dye, and so some other it adds to the sheen. The mercerization process adds to the sheen. So some other threads that you might think of just off the top of your head that are mercerized, DMC threads are mercerized, the cotton threads, Pearl Cotton 5, Pearl Cotton 3, and the DMC embroidery floss. So when you think about that, think about how intense the colors are and think about how shiny they are. That's a really good example of what a mercerized thread looks like. So this one doesn't have as much of a sheen to it as the Pearl Cotton from DMC or as the embroidery floss. And I think part of that is because of the construction of the thread itself. The construction of the thread is actually a cable construction. So that means that there's a core thread. There are 3 strands in watercolors. It is a divisible thread. So you can take it and divide it, split it apart. And when you do that, you'll notice that there is a single core thread that runs up through the middle, and then 2 strands are twisted around that center core thread. So that's what a cable construction is in this case. You can divide this, and it doesn't affect the strength of the thread. If you're working on 18 count canvas, you're going to want to use 1 strand. If you're working on 12, 13, or 14 mesh canvas, you're going to want to use 2 strands. If you're working on 10 mesh canvas, you're going to want to work with all 3. And you always want to divide. If you're going to use multiple strands in your needle, you want to divide the thread and then put back together the number of strands that you're going to work with, and use a laying tool if you're using more than 1 strand in your needle. So let's see, I've got several notes here. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. There are more than 300 colors in the Watercolors line from the Karen collection, so a huge assortment of colors. And when I say color, this is a color. One of these skeins, even though it has multiple colors in it, this is a color. This color, like I said earlier, is Peach Melba. So something that I learned in chatting with Lois earlier this week is that every single color that they have can have anywhere from 2 to 7 different hues in it. So this one you can see is more monochromatic. It has peach, some pink, and some yellow. On the other hand, this one has, let's see, it has orange, fuchsia, hot pink, yellow, purple, lavender. So you can see a whole bunch of different colors in this one particular skein. So a wide variety. I tend to gravitate towards the ones that are more muted or monochromatic, especially on canvases when I'm doing a design that maybe for grass or water or something like that. That's just my personal taste. You can definitely use these however you want. It's like having a crayon box full, you know, if you have a bunch of these threads, it's like having a crayon box full of different colors. So you just, you know, let your, as I say in the blog post this week, let your inner kindergartner out to have fun, because they are really a lot of fun to work with. Now, one of the ways that I do find myself using these that are so variegated most frequently is in counted canvas needlework projects. So for example, from Needle Delights Originals, Kathy Rees is the designer. This is one of her canvas, or one of her projects rather, Peach Melba. And Peach Melba uses both of these watercolors in it for the design. And then there are also several other colors. I haven't stitched it yet, but I have the kit in my stash to stitch at some point. So her kits are very well, her designs are really, really fun to stitch. Her instructions are very well written. So if you like to do counted canvas work, I would suggest, if you've not tried Kathy's projects from Needle Delights Originals, that you do give them a try, because they are really super, super products. You can see I have all the other threads that go with it in here. So I'm going to pop these little guys back in their home so they don't get lost. All right. Let's see. I think I mentioned that you cut your pieces 18 to 20 inches long, no longer, because this is a soft thread, and even though it has been mercerized, which means it's stronger, the more times it passes through the canvas mesh between those canvas threads, the more likely it is to fray. So you don't want it, it's stronger than some threads, but you still don't want to cut longer than 20 inches. And something that you're going to want to do is continue to move your needle down the length of the thread as you stitch, because you don't want the eye of the needle to sit in one spot for a really long time, because it can cut the thread. Because as I've mentioned countless times, the eye of a needle is punched, so it does have a sharp edge to it that can damage your thread. So that's why you don't want to cut your pieces way too long. Plus, the longer they are, the more motion there is in stitching, and so you can, I don't know if any of y'all have run into this, but you can actually injure your shoulder and have like rotator cuff problems from cutting your threads too long. So that's just another little health tip there to add to the mix. So let's see. There are 3 different ways that Lois shared with me that they actually dye their threads. So you may be wondering, how actually do they get the color onto those skeins of thread? One way is very similar to tie-dyeing a t-shirt. What they'll do, something, and I call them thread artists, because that's what they are. They actually work with these threads, and they're painting on the white or natural thread base that they're using. And so anyway, what they do, if you've ever done a tie-dye project for a t-shirt, you know how you take it and you can twist a section of it, and then you put a rubber band around it, or tie a rag or something to get different widths of coverage so that the dye doesn't actually get to part of it. Same process with the thread. So it's very similar. One process is very similar to tie-dyeing. Another way they actually apply the dye to the thread base is by using a paintbrush and just painting onto the skein of thread. And then the third way is an ombre technique, where they actually dip the thread into the dye, and it creates a gradation of color intensity from light to dark, it's usually from the darkest is at one end, and then it gets gradually lighter as you work your way up towards the top. So those are the three ways that they do dye their threads. There may be some others, but those are the three that I'm familiar with. I did, over on the Serendipity Needleworks website this week, there is a blog post that includes more information than what I'm sharing with you here. So I suggest that you go over and read that, because there are some extra tips about working with these threads and some more information about them too. And the Karen Collection has a very nice website too that you might want to check out. It's karen-net.com. So that's a fun place to go and explore more about the Karen Collection threads, because they do have a wonderful assortment of threads. It's not just watercolors. They have a huge variety. Let's see. So the next thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned is Color Fast and dye lots. We need to chat quickly about those two things. So Color Fast, are these threads color fast? They're supposed to be, but because the environmental regulations have changed over the past several years, most manufacturers will not guarantee that dyes are color fast in anything, whether it be a garment or a thread or anything. They're not going to guarantee that something be color fast or is color fast, simply because it's really not possible to do that with the restrictions that are in place now, environmental protection. So the best suggestion is to test it, to test a thread. If you're going to be applying any type of water to your project, whether it be through the blocking process or the finishing process, if you're going to use steam, if you're going to use a misting bottle, like just a spray bottle, some people actually, I don't do this, but I know people who do dunk the whole canvas in water and then pull it out and pin it down to a board. So there are multiple ways to block a canvas, but the two that I do are steaming, and then I also do the misting. I'll stretch it and get it straight and then mist it with a water bottle, but only if I know that the threads that were used on that used on that project are color fast or have been tested. So a way to do that is to cut a piece of the thread off, get a white paper towel, get the thread wet, and then lay it on the paper towel. If any of the color bleeds out, then you know you've got an issue there. So you're not going to want to use water in the blocking process. And that's a whole nother conversation for a different time, so we're not going to get into that here today. But if you find that the thread doesn't bleed, then you're good to go. You can use water in the blocking process or in the finishing process. If it does bleed, then the best thing you can do is take that skein of thread, put it in a basin or in the sink, use very hot water, and use either Ivory liquid soap or palm olive. You can also use Ivory Snow if you can find it. The soap flakes that you use on baby clothes, they're not as easy to find as they used to be. I know I used to use that on Rebecca's baby clothes, but I've had a hard time finding it. Anyway, if you use palm olive, don't use the lemon scented soap. So use Ivory liquid or palm olive, just the green, the plain green. Don't get fancy on the scent. And then you put it very hot water in the basin or in the sink, swish it around, put the thread in there, swish it around, and you want to make sure that you do that until the color doesn't bleed. Once you see that you have to do it multiple times. If it's bleeding a lot, you need to keep changing the water out and doing it over and over again until you get rid of the excess color, or it's the excess dye that's coming out of the thread. So once you've done that, then you rinse it very well, and then you let it air dry. So that's just, and I explained that over on this week's blog post, so check that out. Be sure and do that. In fact, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and share the link to the blog post here in the chat so that you have access to that too. So let's see. Let me get back to where we are. So let's see, I mentioned the ways to test for color fastness. Another thing to keep in mind, if you are going to, and this goes back to testing for color fastness, if you're going to be using steam in the process, what you'll want to do is lay that piece of thread on that paper towel And then you want to get an iron, turn up the heat, and hold the iron over the damp thread and see how that affects it too. If you're just misting it with a water bottle, you don't have to do that step. But if you're going to be steaming, you do need to apply some heat to it so that you can see how that thread is going to respond to heat, because sometimes heat will release dye when just plain water won't. So you just have to play around with it and check it out and test it. And you need to do that on any kind of a project where, like I said, you know that you're going to be using water in either the finishing process or in the blocking process. And that would hold true if you're doing, a lot of people recently have started doing these jackets, denim jackets, doing a piece of needlepoint and attaching it to the jacket. If you're attaching the needlepoint to the jacket in a way that it can't be removed, you definitely need to make sure that you are testing those threads to make sure that they're going to stand up to the cleaning process that you're going to use. I can't speak for what's going to happen with the dry cleaning solvents. That's a whole nother conversation. I would suggest that you talk to a dry cleaning, your dry cleaner, and ask them, maybe how you could test for color fastness on those things, because that would be, like I said, that's a whole nother animal. And we're not going down that rabbit hole either. So, all right. So those are the main things that I wanted to share with you about watercolors. Now I'm going to pop back over here in the chat and see if anybody has any questions. Remember, if you have a question, please post it in all capital letters. It makes it much easier for me to find the questions quickly. And so I'll scroll back through and give y'all a chance to type in and hit send. So, all right, here we go. Oh, goodness, lots and lots of people here. So let's see. All right. Okay, so yes, so I see a lot of people who have used it and some people who have not. So if you've never used it, please do give it a try. Beautiful, beautiful range of colors, useful for all kinds of design components. You can use the blues for water, sky. There's some that are very pale that look really pretty for snow, on the shaded areas of snow. There are lots of colors that are really pretty for fall canvases. If you have a canvas that has different kinds of trees, maybe fall. I'm off the top of my head, I'm just thinking right now, there's a canvas from Maggie and Company that has it's a beautiful fall landscape. So you could use some of these watercolors for the treetops. Watercolors also works very well for tree trunks. They have some beautiful browns that would be very nice for tree trunks. You could also use some of the greens for grass, mountains. They're beautiful colors for mountains too. So a huge assortment of uses for these threads. I mean, just about as much as you can come up with. I mean, truthfully, just about you can use them on just about any canvas. Just you have to let your imagination go to work. So let's see. Like I said, lots of people who have worked with it and some people who have not. So Julie wants to know, when I say a bucket, what do I mean? A plastic drawer. So yes, right now, all of my threads are in a plastic. I have different plastic containers that the threads are in. And now I will have to say, need to go ahead and clarify this. You don't want to store your threads long term in plastic because plastic does not breathe, and especially these natural fibers don't need to be in a place for a long, long time where they cannot breathe. So I try to keep things in a place where they're not going to be in a situation where they're not going to be able to get air to them. So all of my containers are aerated, I guess, so they have vents in them. But I also keep lavender. I don't know if you've seen them before. Those little bitty, they're bags, little, oh shucks, what's the word I'm looking for? They're sheer organza. They're organza bags. You can get them at Hobby Lobby. Michaels may carry them too, but they have little drawstrings on them, and you can put lavender down inside of them and then tie them up and put that down in the bucket with your threads. So that keeps the bugs from getting in there with them. And I usually put 2 or 3 little lavender sachets in with all my threads because my buckets are relatively big. So now my goal is to get away from that, but I haven't found the perfect thread storage system yet. I'm still looking for it. But anyway, all that to say, the threads that are used do go into these plastic containers like this, these plastic envelopes like this. but if they are used, then they're going to probably get used up pretty quickly. So I don't worry about them. When I say long term, I'm speaking in terms of years, not weeks and months. So you don't have to worry about that. But if you do have thread that you're going to be, or that you have stored for years and years and years, you want to be mindful that that thread does need to be able to have air getting to it, so that, the air can circulate around it, because that can cause problems with deterioration, fiber deterioration. So, okay, so let me see if we've got some other. Okay, so Julie, how big is the bucket? My buckets are, I'll have to measure them. I want to say like 12 by 20 and about that deep. So, and I mentioned, I've already done a Q&A. Maybe I did mention it here. I do them by color. So I follow the color wheel. So I have a bucket for neutrals. So there's a bucket for black, a bucket for brown, a bucket for white, a bucket for metallics, and then all the other colors on the color wheel. And I see Patricia says she uses cedar in the plastic shoebox bins, and that works too. Cedar will prevent moths from getting to your threads too. One thing to keep in mind, particularly if you live in the South, it's not so much the moths that get to your threads as it is the silverfish. The silverfish are what get into your threads and chomp, 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 and especially your wool threads. So those are the critters that tend to be the most troublesome here, at least in Alabama. All right, so let's see. What other questions might we have? Watercolors threads are used in Sika and Company's counted cross-stitch designs. Absolutely, they certainly are. Karen Collection threads are used in a variety of different cross-stitch projects and in needlepoint projects, whether they be painted canvas or counted canvas. And something that I want to share with those of you who may not be on the Serendipity Needleworks weekly email list, every week I do share in the weekly email a little special something that I call lanyap. It's what my grandmother used to call that little something extra. And so every week you do get some lanyap, and this week's lanyap is a pattern using watercolors for a little Christmas ornament. So if you get the weekly emails and you haven't checked your email yet, make sure you check your email. And if you don't get the weekly emails, then you may want to sign up. So I'll go ahead and share that link with you here. That just occurred to me that I didn't have that one ready. So I'll make sure that I share that with you here in the chat so that you can also sign up for that if you'd like to. And let's see. How would we know what system is used? Lucy wants to know, how would we know what system is used when we sent the project to a finisher? That's a really good question. So I would suggest if you're sending it to a finisher yourself, ask that finisher, because there are a lot of independent contractors that you can work with. If you're sending it to a finisher through a shop, ask the shop. If they look at you like they don't know what you're talking about, then I would just say go ahead and test the threads for color fastness, just to be on the safe side. And if you have a project that you have already stitched and you don't know whether the threads were color fast because you didn't know that you should check them before you stitched, a way that you can do that, especially if you have any of the thread left, you can test what you have left over, your scraps. If you don't have any left, then, and this would be more of a fix for something. If you end up with something that, like say you decide you're going to block it yourself and you use water on it and you don't know that some of the thread is going to bleed, a way to get rid of that is to and I tell you about this over on the blog this week, but you take your piece and you put it in cool water and you swish it around, agitate it until the extra color comes out. You can continue to swish and swish and swish, and the excess color will come out. So that's one way to fix something that may have bled. If you stitched it and you blocked it and it bled, that's a way to get that excess dye out. So it's not completely. I'm not going to say it's complete. If you have red that bleeds into white, I'm not going to say that's all going to come out, but it does help. So that's one fix. Something to be especially mindful of, and I didn't mention this, is that reds have a tendency to bleed more than most colors. And if you've heard about that old trick, put salt in the water or put vinegar in the water, You can do that, but I don't recommend that you do that. The reason being, particularly with Watercolors threads, is that Lois doesn't recommend that you do that. And when I say Lois, I'm talking about Lois Karen. She's the owner of the company. She says that you don't know how the salt or the vinegar is going to react with the dye and the mordant that's used. And the mordant is something that's used to set the dye in the thread. So they do use a process to set the dye. But when you go monkeying around with throwing in other compounds or chemicals, which basically salt is a I won't say it's a chemical, but it will affect the way something reacts, the way the chemical mordants react, or it can, and so can vinegar. So you just have to be mindful of that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's see. When you talk about let's see. Okay, so Debbie had the same question, so I hope that answered that about if you don't know about the way the finisher is going to do the blocking. And then Julie says, when you talk about using a bucket for your threads, what kind of bucket do you mean? It is a plastic container with a lid that fits down on it, and it has vents where the handles are. And I typically use Rubbermaid containers just because I've had really good luck with those. And this is not similar to Weeks Dye Works. Julie asked if Watercolors is similar to Weeks Dye Works. I don't think it is. Weeks Dye Works is an embroidery floss, and I guess maybe they do have pearl cotton. I'm not positive about that. I would need to check, but this is not a pearl cotton thread. A lot of people think it is because it looks like a pearl cotton, but pearl has to do, the name pearl is indicative of the twist, and this is not a pearl. This is a cable construction thread, and I need to take it out of the bag so you can see. Well, here we go. This thread has a cable construction, so it's not a pearl cotton, even though it looks very much like pearl cotton, but it's not. Okay. Let's see. I love Weeks Dye Works threads too. They're very, very nice. Be mindful of any dyed thread that's hand done, that's hand dyed. You need to be very mindful of those threads and their color fastness, though. I have a tendency to trust the threads that are machine dyed more than I do the ones that are hand dyed, and that's just from experience. So, all right. Yeah, yes, Anne used a bunch of the colors for a Bargello piece, and they are very pretty, right? So Ruth wants to know, do I have a few favorite stitches to use this thread with? Actually, I do. You can do any stitch and that's a very good point too. This brought something to mind that I need to make sure that I mention. If you're going to work with this thread in just the regular tent stitch, you want to make sure that you work it in the continental variation, working back and forth in horizontal rows or up and down in vertical rows. You don't want to work this thread in basket weave, because what you'll end up with is a striping effect or a pooling of colors that can or cannot be very attractive. So that's something to keep in mind too. As far as decorative stitches are concerned, I love stitches that are longer. I typically don't like to do a lot of stitches on a piece that are longer than 4 to 5 canvas threads, although some of them do, some of the stitches you'll find are stretched out over as many as 6 canvas threads. But I do have a tendency to prefer those that are, usually no longer than 4, 5 at the most. But again, personal preference. Byzantine stitch is beautiful in this thread, makes gorgeous water. The Parisian stitch makes really pretty sky, especially when you turn it on its side. They're just really anything that you're going to be able to see the long repeats of the colors. And so anyway, that I like that. That's just 2 just off the top of my head there. So let's see. Does it work to store in plastic bags and not seal? Yes, you definitely can do that, Maureen. I think Maureen's talking about storing these in the floss away bags and then don't seal the bag up in your plastic bins. And you definitely can do that. That's a very good point. Plastic shoe boxes are fine. Silverfish eat books too. They do. And so do crickets. So, and really gross is that roaches also eat books. So, but that's so if you have needlepoint books that you want to make sure that the buggies don't get into, you want to make sure that you keep those books in a place where they're not going to be in a damp spot, a nice dry, well lit spot. Okay, so let's see. Oh dear, Alice said she had a friend who stitched an ornament and the Sundance red beading thread bled onto the ornament. Oh dear, I always hate to hear when things like that happen. So Lucy asked, if we use other threads in our project like floss or impressions, can we still do this? Lucy, I'm not sure what you're asking. If you'll clarify for me what you're asking about, you can still do, then I'll be happy to answer that, because I didn't see the question when I was talking about whatever it was you're asking about. So let's see. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I that's why I usually turn off the captioning. As Sarah says that that Facebook's translation of my accent is really funny. I usually turn the translation off. That's the reason when we do our transcriptions or our closed captioning for all of our videos, we have to do a lot of proofreading to make sure that the artificial intelligence that's doing the transcribing actually is putting down on the closed captions what I said. So that's why it takes longer. We have to read everything. Okay. So let's see. I don't know. Several people have said frozen. I don't know if I froze. Sorry. I hope I didn't. And then, oh, okay. So Ann says plastic bags, punch holes with a needle or point of scissors, and that will let the air circulate too. So that's a very good point. All right. Y'all have had some great questions and some great comments, and it's been a delight being here with you this afternoon. I do have an announcement that I'd like to share with you. At the end of at the end of July, we are at the middle of July, so we have 2 more Thursdays where we will be gathering like this, and then Needlepoint TV is going to be making a pivot. It will not be live. It'll be recorded, and it will be short little snippets of information, tips and tricks and things like that have to do with needlepoint. So it will be, it's going to change its format, and I'll be sharing more information about that as we get closer to the end of this month in the weekly emails. So there will still be Needlepoint TV episodes, but there'll be little short bits of helpful hints and tips, and they will not be done live. At least that's the plan for now. So they will all be housed over on the YouTube channel that I shared with you just a little while ago. So if you aren't subscribed, you're going to definitely want to make sure that you do subscribe to that so that you get updates. And again, if you'd like to be a part of our weekly email list, please use the link that's in the chat box or in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to make sure that you get added to that weekly email list. I have another group that I'm going to be going to visit with here in about 30 minutes, so it's time for me to wrap things up this afternoon here for this episode of Needlepoint TV. It has been a delight to be here with you, and I thank you ever so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and until next time, happy stitching. Bye for now.